Zolgesundsein began the Farbrengen this afternoon that there's a question, there's an inyan of tadir, which means there's an inyan that comes constantly. Then we have another inyan of chaviv, something which is very dear to us. And the question arises, when we have an inyan which is constant, which is tadir, or we have an inyan, and we have an inyan, which is chaviv, which is dear to us. So the question is, which inyan should we discuss first? What does he mean? It is Shabbos Mevorchim today, just like any other Shabbos Mevorchim. So the idea of Shabbos Mevorchim is an idea of a tadir. This is something which we have every month. We have a Shabbos Mevorchim. However, today we have something additional. The fact that the chvives, that it is the Shabbos Mevorchim of the month of Sivan, which is a very special month. So the question arises, which inyan should we discuss first? Should he talk first about the inyan of Shabbos Mevorchim, which this is something which we have not only today, but we have it every month? Or should we talk first about the inyan of the specialty of this month, which this is the inyan of Sivan? After a lengthy introduction, and the Rebbe brought out how we find at times in Torah we find how great a new inyan is and how dear and important it is when something is new and fresh. And that is what we find in Chazal, that Chazal tell us that we have to look at Torah as it was just given to us today. So we see that the inyan of a new inyan has a very big plus to it. And on the other hand, we find many inyanim in Chazal where Chazal stress about the repeat of an inyan, how important that is. And it is explained very simply because the inyan is repeated. This in itself is, like the expression goes, this in itself is a chazakeh. Once an inyan is repeated several times, it becomes a chazakeh. We take it for granted that this is a right and proper inyan. Regarding Chodesh Sivan, Chodesh Sivan is, as the Gemara tells us, Yarchet Lisoeh. It is the third month. Or as we find the Pasuk tells us that it was Anrosh Chodesh Sivan, Beyoim Hazeh, Be'echod LaChodesh, the first of the month, B'Chodesh HaShlishi, in the third month. That is when the Yidden arrived at Har Sinai. The third month, if we count from Nisan. Nisan is first. Chodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodoshim. Iyar second. Thereby we come to Sivan. Sivan is the third month. And here the Rebbe explained the greatness of number 3. That the number 3 is a very chashav inyan. One, when an inyan is a single, we have only one. Then when we have 2 inyanim, it's 2 equal, one inyan versing the other, and we do not have one overweighing the other. These 2 inyanim are versing one another. However, when we have a possibility that we have 2 inyanim and plus a third, here one already has an opportunity to choose. As the Rebbe brought the example, we know that the Pasuk tells us, Ra'eino sati lefanecha es hachayim v'esatoiv. The Pasuk says that the Rebbe has given the good and life, and also the Rebbe created in this world the evil, the ra. What does the Pasuk continue? Uvacharta b'chayim. So what do we have here? We have 3 inyanim. We have chayim and toiv. We have mavis and ra, one versing the other. However, when the third inyan comes, which is the person, and he chooses from the 2, which is the proper inyan, he's given the nesinas koyach from the Rebbe Take, what inyan to choose. Uvacharto b'chayim, as the pasuk itself says. However, here we see the ma'ila of 3. We have 2 inyanim versing one another. Comes the person who is the third inyan, and he can choose and select what he prefers. So this is the ma'ila of 3. Actually, this is the whole great inyan of Avodas Hashem. And here we see the ma'ila of the Avodah Vayit. There is the Yetzer Tov, there is the Yetzer Hara, and they are in a constant battle amongst themselves. comes the person, comes the Yid. He is the one who chooses which path he prefers, and Memela, this is the tayakite of the Avodah of a Yid, the dearness of the Avodah of a Yid. Where is all this reflected in number 3? To such an extent that the Yid is ultimately matzliach to serve the Reibishter b'chol levavcha. How do Chazal comment on the words which we say in Krishma, V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol miyodecha? So on the words b'chol levavcha, which is plural hearts, should have said b'chol lipcha. Chazal comment b'shnei yitzarecha, that the Yid ultimately is so successful that he turns over both of his Yitzhars. Side the Yetzer Hara, side the Yetzer Toiv, and with both of them he serves the Reibishter. Which this is based on a pasuk in Krishma. So this is the Maila of Chodesh HaShlishi, which is the month of Sivan, which we are benching today. Today we bench the Chodesh HaShlishi. And the Maila of this month is that it stands for this outstanding inyan which number 3 brings with itself. Bichlal, the Chazal tell us that Shmois HaChadoshim Olui Mohem Mi Bavel. Where did the names of the Jewish months originate? So the Chazal tell us something very interesting, that when the Yidden were in Bavel, that is where all these names originated. We see Taka, the Torah tells us, the Torah refers to the month of Sivan as B'chodesh HaShlishi. The Torah doesn't use the name Sivan. Where did the word Sivan, or any other month, where were all these names, where did all of this begin? This began when the Yidden were in Galus and Bavel. So the Rebbe teaches today, what is the Pshat in the Gemara? What the Gemara tells us, Shmois HaChadoshim, the names of the Jewish months, Olu Imohem Mi Bavel. Olu means, Olu stems from the same word as an aliyah, as an uplifting. That when the Yidden came back from Bavel, actually it's based on what Chassidus explains, that the whole inyan of Golis is not an inyan of a Yerida. On the contrary, when Yidden come out of Golis, Yidden reach to yet higher Madregas. So this is what Chazal tell us also, Shmois HaChadoshim, Olui Mohem Mi Bavel. This piled, this created an aliyah, an uplifting, a spiritual uplifting in the Yidden when they left Bavel. And they took along the names of the various months which were adopted while they were in Bavel. This piled, this hat ufgetan, an aliyah, Olui Mohem Mi Bavel, an aliyah, and all of the Yidden had uplifted them when the Yidden came out of Bavel, which was the Gullus of that time. While talking about the inyan of B'chol Levavcha, B'shnei Yitzarecha, which is a pasuk in Krishma, Rebbe stressed that to see the importance of Krishma Bechlal, and Memela all the lessons which are contained in Krishma, we find something very interesting. The Rebbe says, Mishnah, begins with Me'emes HaKoyra Neshma Be'arves. That's the very first Mishnah of all the Shisha Sidra Mishnah, is from what time are we permitted to read the evening Shema? Why is it that Rabbeinu HaKodesh, the author of Mishnah, found it proper that this is the most important thing, that with this he should begin all of Mishnah with the mitzvah of the evening Shema? So the Rebbe explained, he says it is brought in Sfarim, that the first mitzvah that a person is Mekayim is the mitzvah of the evening Krishma. Why? Because when one becomes Bar Mitzvah, in other words, a person becomes Bar Mitzvah, so when he reaches age 13, let's assume somebody's birthday is tonight. So what is the very first mitzvah he has an opportunity to be Mekayim? That's tonight's Ma'ariv. And in tonight's Ma'ariv he has the Krishma. So being that this is the very first mitzvah which a person could be Mekayim, say a Bar Mitzvah, the Rebbe said, as well as a Bas Mitzvah, this is the very first mitzvah which they can really fulfill. That is why Rabbeinu HaKadosh had chosen to put this as the first of all of the Mishnahs. By Kochim, which were brought in Karbonis in the Beis HaMikdash, there it was a different system. There the night went after the previous day. In other words, tonight would be a continuation to today, to Shabbos, as far as halachas of eating Karbonis and so forth. However, as far as Avodas Hashem, and Bechlal in the Jewish calendar, it is that tonight Mitzvah Shabbos is already part of tomorrow, is already part of Sunday. And therefore, when one becomes bar mitzvah, in other words, one whose birthday is tomorrow's date, his very first mitzvah, his or hers very first mitzvah, which they have an opportunity to fulfill, is as soon as it becomes dark, they go ahead and they daven ma'ariv or they learn krishma, and here they fulfill the mitzvah of krishma. Talking about this inyan of Golis, Shmei Sachadoshim, Alu Imoyim Bavel, which Bavel was a Golis, the Rebbe also referred to something which he already mentioned at previous occasions, that in Hebrew spelling, the difference between Golis and Geula and Golis have almost the same lettering. What is the difference? The difference is an Aleph. Golis, Geula rather, has the same lettering which we have in Golis. The only difference is it has an Aleph. What is the Aleph? The Aleph is the Rebbeinu Shalom. That when Yidden work hard and Yidden struggle with the Alufei Shalaylam, with the Rebbeinu Shalom in mind, that is when it is turned over from Golis and it becomes an inyan of Gul. This is so far as Shabbos Mevorchim Sid. However, as the Rebbe mentioned at the beginning, there is the inyan of Shabbos Mevorchim, which applies to each and every month. So here the Rebbe explained the expression which we have, Shabbos Kodesh Mevorchim HaChodesh, which this is an accepted expression when we want to refer to the Shabbos Mevorchim. And the Rebbe broke this expression really apart, took it apart. And he says, really we are tying together two inyanim. Shabbos Kodesh is an inyan of Shabbos. The inyan of Shabbos is a day of the week which has a shaykhis to Yidden and has a shaykhis even to non-Yidden as well. As a day of the week. It's a day at the end of the week. In fact, the Rebbe said that there are many languages which refer to this day of Shabbos with a very similar expression as we taka refer to it as Shabbos. That is B'negei Shabbos. Shabbos Kodesh. Then we stress Mevorchim HaChodesh. Mevorchim HaChodesh, we bless the month. Which month? The months as the calendar is set up for whom? For Yidden. It's the Jewish calendar. So actually we are tying together two inyan. We are tying together the weekly cycle, which is a cycle not only for Yidden. This is a cycle for the entire world. Shabbos, days of the week, Sunday, Monday through Shabbos. And we are also including in this phrase the concept of Mevorchim HaChodesh, which this is something which is only special for Yidden. So first of all, the Rebbe said, the expression should have been somehow a little different. It should have been an expression to stress first what's negayah to Yidden, Mevorchim HaChodesh, and then comes the inyan klali, which is negayah to the whole world, to Shabbos. And the Rebbe says he's sure that we can find some sort of an expression, or some sort of an expression could have been created, which would have been in a format which would stress first Mevorchim HaChodesh, which is an inyan which expresses the avodah of Yidden, and then we would talk about Shabbos. The Rebbe says it is not so. Why? Every Yid has the inyanim as the inyanim are in Welt, in the world, in his environment, in his surroundings. Then we come to what he is supposed to accomplish as a Yid. And the Rebbe put it very simple. The Rebbe says, we wake up in the morning. We wake up from our sleep, which is a natural thing for every human being. In other words, this is the concept of Shabbos. In other words, the idea of a weekly cycle. Everyone is alike. Every person goes to sleep at night and rises in the morning. However, what is the uftu? What is the accomplishment of a Yid? A Yid does not stop right there by the idea of the weekly cycle. The Yid immediately, as he rises in the morning, what are the first words of a Yid? Maidani. Why does a Yid say immediately as he rises, Moidani? Because a Yid right away refers to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shivisi Hashem Lenegdi Summit. He has the Rabbeinu Shalom constantly in front of him. Memele, as soon as we wake up, we remind ourselves on the Rabbeinu Shalom, we have to say, Moidani Lefanecha, express our thanks to the Rabbeinu Shalom for returning our soul back to us. So actually, in daily life, the constant Aveda of a Yid is based in such a format. First, he comes across the Inyanim as the Inyanim are in Welt. And what does he have to do? In the Welt, in the Inyan of Shabbos. Here we're teaching Shabbos as an Inyan of Welt. In other words, Shabbos as a day of the week, which the entire world has. Shabbos as a day of its week. A Yid right away instills the Kedusha, the concept of Mavochem HaChodesh. Mavochem HaChodesh is the Avodah of a Yid. Here, this is where a Yid differs from Goyim. So we are told we have to put together both concepts. We are take in a weekly cycle just like everyone else in the world. In other words, we have our tivis dike inyanim, our gashmis dike inyanim, just like everybody else in the world. And there is the inyanim of teva, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the rules of nature which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created into this world. And here the Rebbe spoke at length what Chassidus explains regarding teva, nature. So Chassidus stresses not the pshat that this is not led by HaKadosh Baruch Hu chas v'shalom. Where does the word teva, nature, originate from? We say every day in davening, in the shira, we say tubu b'yamsuf. It was drowned in the yamsuf. When something is drowned, it means that the object is there. It is there in its completeness. The only thing is, it is covered with water. The same thing when the Rebbe created the world. He did not want. He created it in such a format that the world should seem so, for the eyesight of one who doesn't want to look a little bit deeper. It should seem that there is no koyach elakim chas v'shalom, and that the world runs by itself. And the getlachkeit which is in the world is in the format of tuvu. It is drowned, it is hidden, but it is definitely there. And here the Rebbe referred to the Rambam. Rambam tells us regarding Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu came to a realization and to a conclusion that there is a Rabbeinu Shalom. How did he come to this conclusion? The Rambam tells us because he began looking around the world and he began bothering him until he finally realized that there's definitely a manhig lebirazu, there's definitely somebody who is running this world, until he came to realize that it is the Rabbeinu Shalom. But who helped him? Who led him? It was on his own. Why? Because really when we dig into it and we look deeper into it, we find that chas v'shalom to say so, there is the Rabbeinu Shalom who is leading the world. However, it is in the form of teva that is hidden. So this is what we say is the inyan of Shabbos mevochen. And as the expression goes, it is Shabbos kodesh and mevochen ha-kodesh. The uftu is, the accomplishment here is how a Yid is combining both of the inyanim. Shabbos stands for Weltische Inyanim, the world, worldly Inyanim. And the obligation of a Yid is to combine both of these Inyanim, to put together the week as it stands as a weekly cycle, which actually everyone in the world has this. However, a Yid doesn't leave it there, doesn't stop right there. What a Yid does is, he takes the weekly cycle, the Shabbos, and ties it together with Mavochem HaChodesh, which this is where it is obvious that he is a Yid and he is an Oved Hashem serving the Rebishter, fulfilling the will of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is regarding Shabbos Mavochem. Now let us go a step further. Today's Sedra. Today's Sedra, the Rebbe continues, is Behar-Bechukosai. Here the Rebbe gave us a little introduction. He stressed already at previous times that when we say two sedras are combined, mechubarim, it does not mean that they are two separate sedras and they are mechubar. This is one sedra. Today, the sedra is Behar-Bechukosai. V'haraya, it is the middle of Revi, where the person who is called up to Revi makes his first bracha and they're still reading Behar, makes his second bracha when they are reading Bechukosai, and in the middle of his aliyah, these sedras are combined. So, and actually, this year it is one sedra. It's not two separate sedras, it's one sedra. One sedra whose name is Behar-Bechukosai. That's the name of this week's sedra. And here the Rebbe spoke about the greatness of the name. In other words, Behar could be a Seder in itself. Bechukosai could be a Seder in itself. And Behar-Bechukosai is again one Seder in itself when they are read together. And the Rebbe said, could have been that they could have found some sort of a different name to name the Seder when they come combined, both Sedras. The Rebbe quoted a pasuk in Novi, in Yeshaya. The Rebbe says that Novi Yeshaya tells us that Mashiach has 8 names. So just like Mashiach has 8 names, this week's Seder has 2 names, Behar-Bechukosai. The Rebbe says it is not like there's a Chazal. The Chazal tell us that Moshe Rabbeinu had 10 names. Moshe's 10 names, not the pshat he was called with 10 names, a sequence of 10 names. Like Behar-Bechukosai is 2 words, Moshe had 10 names. Moshe had 10 different names. In other words, at different occasions he was called with different names. And each one of them 1 word. Here, today's Seder is Behar-Bechukosai, 2 different words, take, but they are combined that this is the name of this week's Seder. Just like we find B'negei Mashiach, that Mashiach has 8 names. What is the pshat 8 names? A continuation of 8 words. The same here, it's a continuation of 2 words. What meaning does it have to us, these 2 words of Behar-Bechukosai? The Rebbe explained, let us touch up each one of these words. Behar means a mountain. Bechukosai means these mitzvahs which are chukim. We know that the mitzvahs are divided into 3 categories. There is edus, chukim, and mishpatim. So the Bechukosai refers to these mitzvahs that are in the category of chukim. Edus are those mitzvahs that are symbolic of something. Mishpatim are those mitzvahs which our seichel understands that we have to fulfill. Comes to chukim, these are mitzvahs which we on our own would never have known to do so. And still the Torah tells us we should do it because the Rabbeinu Shalom commanded us to do it. And why are they called chukim? As Rashi comments, Chuko chokakti, gzeiro gazarti, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, he made the decree, he made the law. Ve'ein lecha reshus laharer achareh. We don't have no permission to give it even any kind of second thoughts. We have to do what the Rabbeinu Shalom told us. What are these 2 names? What kind of meaning does this have to us in the way of taking a heroah, of taking a lesson of Avodas Hashem? So the Rebbe explains as follows. Behar means that a Yid has to feel that he's higher than anyone else in the world. We are on a mountain. We are higher. And by constantly keeping this in mind, this will give us strength that we will not be nispol, we will not be affected from the goyim around us who are laughing from the Yidden who are fulfilling mitzvahs. Which this is actually the opening words of the Shulchan Aruch, al yevoish mipnei hamaligim, that one should not be embarrassed from those who laugh from him. When can one hold out and not be embarrassed? That is when he holds himself a little bit higher from everyone around him. That is Behar. This inyan of Behar has to be applied to what? To Bechukosai. Here the Rebbe goes a step further. If so, one will say he will hold himself Behar. In other words, he will hold himself that he's on a mountain, he's high. In other words, this may lead him to a little bit to an inyan of Gaiva. So let us look right away at the second word. What is the second word to Behar? Behar Sinai. So Chazal tell us, why was Sinai worthy that the Rebbe should give the Torah on Sinai, not on any other mountain? So Chazal tell us, the nomich mikol turaya. Sinai was the lowest of all the mountains. In other words, on one hand, we are required to have an expression of highness, a feeling of to be able to overcome those who are laughing from us and those who try to interfere us observing mitzvahs. However, we have to know that this hoichkeit, This inyan of a barg, this inyan of har, only has to apply to Sinai, to the inyanim which were given at Sinai, and to the inyanim which we go on to the next week's Chazarah to Behar-Bechukosai. However, regarding all other inyanim, chas v'shalom, we're not allowed to express ourselves and think that we are har, we are high, we are an image of a mountain. Har is a maila. When is har a maila? When it comes together with Sinai. In other words, the Rebbe spoke about it on a previous occasion. Actually, we are combining here both inyanim. We are combining the feeling of a har. However, it is controlled by the concept of Sinai. Take a mountain, but not the highest mountain. A mountain and a low mountain. Here the Rebbe said there are two types of people who are trying, two types of occasions actually, who are trying to distract the Yid from observing Torah mitzvahs. There's the outside world, and there is the inside, the Yetzirah within him, the Chazarah Shebekirbecha. The Chazarah Shebekirbecha tries at times also to laugh from a person and tell him that you have to do things according to reason, according to seichel. And here the Rebbe referred to what was going on in Russia when the Yevasektia, KGB, when they took over, and they began spreading their thoughts across Russia. What was their approach? Their approach was fine. Their initial approach, at least, was, if a Yid wants to observe Torah and mitzvahs, if we're talking about an adult, why not? But when we're talking about youngsters, we're talking about children, it is not right, it is not fair that parents should force their way of life on their children. When their children will grow up, the child will decide that he wants to choose this way as his parents lived. He wants to choose the same path of life for himself. Fine, that he could do. But parents should take little children and force them into Aleph Beis, and force them into answering Amen, and force them into making a bracha. Train them that way that they should make a bracha on whatever they eat, and what they eat should only be kosher food. All this should be brought to a person while he's still young, while he's still a child. They were claiming this is unfair. Here we're taking away the rights of a person. Here we are coming on to the gedank of Bechukosai. We cannot be led by our own seichel. We cannot be led by all these arguments which the Chazarah Shebekirbecha the Yetzirah is trying to create, and all types of complaints which he's trying to build up. Here the Torah tells us Bechukosai. We're supposed to listen to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chukah hakakti, gzeiro gazarti, ve'elo harishos laharecha. Our attitude to Yiddishkeit has to be in a way of chukah. We can't start with our own rationale, with our own understanding, and then we're going to be affected by the environment and by all those who are giving different types of approaches to Yiddishkeit. This we're not allowed to do. The way a Yid is supposed to be an Oved Hashem is in the format of Bechukosai. Chukah hakakti is just mentioned. Gzeiro gazarti ve'elo harishos laharecha. So here we have the lesson, which can be derived from both the combination of both sedras. There's a maile and har. A Yid always has to know regarding Avodas Hashem as a steht auf dem Berg. He's on a mountain. He's higher than his environment and the world around him. And by knowing that, this will give him strength that he will be able to overcome all those who are trying to interfere with him. And at the same time, Bechukosai, to know that whatever we are doing regarding fulfilling the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it has to be done in a way of Bechukosai, in a sense of Kabbalah. The Rebbe recently in the Farbrengens is talking about the greatness of the Siyumim, a learning of the Rambam, number one, and also, since before Pesach, the Siyumim and the Rambam. And today the Rebbe again urged very, very strongly that in those areas, in those places where a Siyum and the Rambam did not take place yet, he's begging that Siyumim and the Rambam should be arranged. Rebbe says, even though when a Siyum is arranged and many people are invited, those who are invited did not learn the Rambam. So what type of a simcha is it for them? For the one who learned Rambam and he's completing Rambam, to him it's a simcha. However, the one who did not learn the Rambam, what type of joy is it for him? The Rebbe says very simple. It's an expression that when a brother makes a chasana, the brother, to the other close relatives, they also feel as mechutanim. True, they didn't learn the Rambam. However, their brother learned Rambam. All Yidden are brothers. Memela, so as such type of a feeling, they have to take part in the simcha. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, when the siyum is made, says it's customary at a siyum that the first halacha and the last halacha are being learned. So Memela, those Yidden who did not take part in the shiurim of the Rambam for the year round, at least they will be learning these halachas. And Memela, at least these Yidden will be learning at least somewhat of a halacha, the beginning halacha and the end halacha, which is also an inyan. In any event, the Rebbe concluded it is tremendous inyan to make these siyumim on the Rambam, and also the shiurim of Rambam in itself, and everyone should take a seat to participate in learning the Rambam, as the Rambam was divided in any of the ways, whether they will be learning 3 prakim a day, and for those that can't 3 prakim, to learn 1 perik a day, or at least learning it in the Sefer HaMitzvahs of the Rambam. The Rebbe also gave mashke today during the Farbrengen to those who will be making siyumim on the Rambam in various places during this week. The Rebbe says that in this mashke, he has mixed mashke which came from the siyum of the Rambam, which took place in Fez, in Morocco, which is where the Rambam lived for 6 years. 6 years of his life, the Rambam lived there. The Rebbe mentioned it already at a few occasions. It seems like the siyum of the Rambam in Morocco was very dear. The Rebbe very much appreciated it. And another siyum, which took place in Kahir, in Cairo, in the Beis HaKnesses, in the shul, which is named the Beis HaKnesses HaRambam. The Rebbe says it is broad in Achronim. He saw in Svarim that being that the Rambam lived in Mitzrayim, and the Rambam was very active in Mitzrayim, they say that the word Rambam abbreviates Revois, it's a pasuk, Revois Moifsai Be'eretz Mitzrayim, which means Reish, Mem, Beis, Mem, Rambam. Which means HaKadosh Baruch Hu expressed himself, he will show his moifsim, he will show his miracles in the land of Mitzrayim. It is the Rambam also who lived up to this type of an attitude of Revois Moifsai Be'eretz Mitzrayim. The Rambam showed his strength, his moifsim, by throughout all of his activities and all the various types of activities which the Rambam was involved in while he lived in Mitzrayim. In this mashke which the Rebbe gave to the various siyumim, there was also mixed in from the siyum HaRambam which took place recently also in the shul which is named the shul Beis HaKnesses HaRambam in the city of Cairo. As it's customary in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe also discusses a halacha in the Rambam, which has a shaykhus to today's Shia. The Rebbe discussed the halacha in Rambam, in Hilchos Shabbos, Perik Chavtes. The last halacha of Perik Chavtes, that is where the Rambam discusses the dinim of Havdalah. And here the Rambam mentions Psamim. Why is it that on Motzei Shabbos we make a bracha on Psamim, the Rambam says? The soul of the person is very sad because to part with the Shabbos. That is why we make her happy, and we calm her with something which has a good scent, a good odor, which is Psamim. This is the reason which the Rambam gives for Psamim. The Rebbe says if we look into the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and in other Paiskim, we find different reasons. We find reason because a Yid has a Neshama Yiseira, an extra soul on Shabbos, and being that we're parting from the Neshama Yiseira on Shabbos, the person feels very bad about it. To calm the person, that is why we give him some. The Rambam does not mention the Neshama Yiseira. Now the question arises, what is regard to Yontef? Why don't we make a bracha on Psamim on Yontef? When we Motzei Yontef we make Havdalah, why don't we also make a bracha on Psamim? So the Rebbe says, this is a Tosfos. There's a Tosfos in Psachim who raises this question. And Tosfos answers that on Yontif we have very delicious meals. We have very good sudas on Yontif. So the person is calmed because of the good sudas which he ate during the Yontif. That's how Tosfos answers. Discussing this whole inyan, we're talking about a Neshama Yisera. The Rebbe quoted a Zohar. The Zohar tells us that really there's a Neshama Yisera on Yontif, there's a Neshama Yisera on Chol HaMoed, and there's a Neshama Yisera also on Rosh Chodesh. So the Rebbe explained, however, when we're talking about the Neshama Yisera, it seems that we're talking about different levels of this Neshama Yisera. We cannot compare the level of the Neshama Yisera which a Yid has on Shabbos to the level of it that he has on Rosh Chodesh. Behar-Bechukosai on Rosh Chodesh we're even permitted to do work. There are women that don't do certain type of work on Rosh Chodesh, but men do all type of work on Rosh Chodesh. Memela, the Rebbe says, Benegei Yontif, Chol HaMoed, and then Benegei Yontif, we take have a Neshama Yisera. But the Neshama Yisera is not of that type of a Madrege, it's not equivalent to the level which we have on Shabbos. Mele, being on Shabbos, it is a very high Madrege. On Shabbos, it's a very high Madrege. That is why there's a special bad feeling by the person that he's parting with the Neshama Yisera, and that is why he has to come on to Psam. Discussing this inyan of Neshama Yisera, which is its source is original in the Zohar. The Rebbe says, question arises, how does the Rambam react to inyonim which are not alpi nigla but are alpi kabbalah? The Rebbe says that first of all there's a Ragatshava. We know how the Ragatshava was involved in the Rambam. On a specific halacha which the Rambam paskins, the Ragatshava learns pshat. The Ragatshava looks for the source of the Rambam, and the source of the Rambam can only be found in Kabbalah. And interesting, the Rebbe points out, we know that the Ragatshava is also known only for learning Nigla the Torah. He also stood away from Pnimiyus HaTorah, from learning Chassidus. And at the same time, he agreed, and he writes in his Svarim, that a source of a halacha, and the Rambam can only be, a specific halacha, can only be found in Kabbalah. Besides, the Rebbe says, the Rambam himself writes, that before he wrote his Sefer, he went through all the Tshuvas HaGoynim. In the Tshuvas HaGoynim, there are many inyonim which are based al pi Kabbalah. So we must say that the Rambam also had a knowledge and an understanding not only in Nigla Torah but also in Pnimiyus Torah. And therefore there could be many inyonim in the Rambam that the basis for this psak is takim Pnimiyus Torah. The way the Rebbe is learning pshat here, the nefesh is feeling very bad for the parting of the Shabbos, that the Rambam Taka also means the inyan of the Neshama Yisera. This whole inyan of Neshama Yisera is Taka explained in the Zohar. But when the Rambam here is referring to the nefesh, the eves, the bad feeling, how bad a person feels from parting of Shabbos, it doesn't mean necessarily only the general idea of Shabbos. It is referred to the Neshama Yisera which a person has on Shabbos, and this is why one feels so bad. It comes Motzei Shabbos, he has to part from it. This is all included in the halach and the Rambam, and that is why we recite the bracha of Psamim on Mitzvah Shabbos. However, on Mitzvah Yontif, the Neshama Yisera is not so strong on Yontif as it is on Shabbos. That is why there is no need for Psamim on Yontif. That's how the Rebbe is learning. It is also customary in the Farbrengen that the Rebbe explains a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos during the summer weeks when we recite Pirkei Avos every day after Mincha, every Shabbos after Mincha. Today we recited Perek Chamishi, the fifth Perek. Fifth Perek begins with Asara Ma'amores Nivra Olam. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when He created the world, He created it with 10 ma'amoris, with 10 sayings. And then the Mishnah goes on with all different types of inyonim that have a shaychus to number 10. Mishnah Beis is Asara Doiros Modon Vad Noach. Mishnah Gimel, Asara Nisyonis, Nisnas Avram Avinu, 10 tests which Avram Avinu had. Mishnah Dalet is what? 10 Nisim, 10 miracles which performed in Mitzrayim. Mishnah Hey, Asara Nisim, which happened in the Beis HaMikdash. Then we come to Mishnah Vav. Mishnah Vav, Asara Dvorim Nivru Be'erev Shabbos Ben Hashmoshes. There were 10 things which were created on Friday, Erev Shabbos, at twilight, Ben Hashmoshes. And the Mishnah tells us which all of these 10 are. Rabbi raised several very interesting questions regarding this Mishnah. First of all, let us look into the sequence of the Mishnahs. Mishnah tells us, there were 10 mamoros which HaKadosh Baruch Hu used when He created the world. Then the Mishnah still sticks. In other words, we see that the Mishnah here is trying to explain in Yonim that have a shaykhs to number 10. So the Mishnah goes, there were 10 generations from Adam till Noach. Yeah? We go all the way down to the Beis HaMikdash. Afterwards, we come back. There were 10 things which were created on the... When do we mean by Friday? Obviously, we mean the first Friday of creation. The first Friday, Ben Hashmoshes. Where does this Mishnah belong? This Mishnah belongs to be Mishnah Beis. After the Mishnah of Asara Mamoris Nivra Elam, that is when we should have been told, there were 10 things which were created like 5 days later, 6 days later. Which happened when? On the first Friday, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created 10 important things. Another question? There's a pasuk. Magid dvarav leYankov, chukov u'mishpatav leYisrael. We say it's a pasuk in Tehillim, we recite it in davening. The Medrash tells us on this pasuk that whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us to do, He Himself adheres to the same thing. No. Erev Shabbos bein Hashmoshes. Are we allowed to go ahead and do malacha? No. How was the Rabbeinu Shalom able to go ahead and create things Erev Shabbos bein Hashmoshes? Erev Shabbos bein Hashmoshes, twilight, that is, in other words, the time of Shkia. From after the Shkia till Tzeis HaKachavim. That is the time that is called bein Hashmoshes. That time we're already not allowed to do any malacha. So if we are not allowed to do malacha, the Rabbeinu Shalom is also not allowed to do malacha. And let us see what He created things. He created luchos. He created other inyanim. Let us look through the Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses various inyanim which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created at that time. How was He allowed to do it? So the Rebbe is learning as follows. The emes is, in Bein Hashmoshes, this period of time of Bein Hashmoshes, there is a long discussion in Poskim, what is this period of time? There are some that claim it is Safik Yom, Safik Laila. We do not know, we are in doubt. Could be this time is considered day, could be it is considered night. Being that we are reluctant, that is why when it is Friday we don't do malachas, because it could be a Shabbos. There's another interpretation that is given, that it is a time in itself. It is a mixture like of day and night. It's a metzias bifnei atzmai, as the expression would go. But again, it's such an... What led to this opinion that it is a metzias bifnei atzmai? Again, because it is, we are not clear what it is. In other words, it's a mixture of day and night. Being it is a mixture of day and night, that is why it became a metzias farzich, it became a metzias in itself. That is why, as far as we are concerned, we're not allowed to do any melachas. For whom could you say that you don't know if it's day or night? This can only be applied regarding us human beings. Regarding the Rabbeinu Shalom, you cannot say that the Rabbeinu Shalom does not know whether this time of Friday, after twilight time, whether it is Friday or it is Shabbos. Regarding the Rabbeinu Shalom, you cannot say that. When the Rabbeinu Shalom went ahead and created all of these things, it was Take Bein Hashmoshes, but it was the Bein Hashmoshes, but the Rabbeinu Shalom knew definitely that it is still Yom and it is not Laila. It is Yom, it is Friday. Laila would be Shabbos. Shabbos, Tak Hashem doesn't create. Kadosh Baruch Hu finished all of His creatings till Friday, till we entered Shabbos. However, the Rebbe explained, he was allowed to do malacha until the very, very final second once Shabbos comes in. Till Shabbos comes. Once it is Shabbos, he's not doing malacha. But till this very touch of Shabbos, we don't know when the touch of Shabbos is. The Rabbeinu Shalom knew. The Rabbeinu Shalom knew he was well able to do malacha till then. Now the question arises, why is this Mishnah here not Mishnah Beis, but it is counted after all of the Inyanim? This the Rebbe explains very simple. Rebbe says as follows. This Mishnah, first the Mishnah talks about Inyanim which were going on in Derech HaTeva. He created the world. Then another Inyan which has a shaykhs to the number Asara. There were 10 generations, Madam Vad Noach, and it goes on all these type of Inyanim which HaKadosh Baruch Hu did in this world. An Inyan which is L'mayla Mizmanu Makim, something which is completely out of the realm of nature, which is, as we are now explaining, something which shows the godless Hashem to such an extent, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu was able to do a thing at a time when He knows whether it is Yom Alayla, and we don't. So it's an Inyan which is Legamre L'mayla Memdida V'Hagbala. This is something which the Mishnah, and it also has a shaykhs to the number of 10. This is something which the Mishnah left for last, because first we discuss all of the inyanim which have a shaykhs to medida v'hagbala, to limitations to this world. Then we discuss something which is totally out of the limitations of this limited world, and this is Mishnah Yud, which talks about the inyanim which are Kodesh Vav rather, which talks also about Yud inyanim, about 10 inyanim which were created on Erev Shabbos. However, as far as HaKadosh Baruch Hu's, from the Rebbe knew that it is not Shabbos yet. We cannot differentiate in that time which is Shabbos and which is Chayil. To us, it is Safik Yom, Safik Laila, and that is why we have to in that time heat up, observe all the dinam of Shabbos. However, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was able to create it. Now let us go to the Parshas HaShavua of this week, which the Rebbe explained in today's Sedre. It's customary in every Farbrengen, where the Rebbe explains an Inyan in Rashi, in Pshutei Shel Mikra, and the Rebbe points out how every word that Rashi tells us is extremely important in order for us to understand Pshutei Shel Mikra. And at times the Rebbe raises questions which obviously are inyanim which are not understood al pi pshat. Memela, we do not know why Rashi really should comment something. The Rebbe points out that obviously we have a question why Rashi doesn't comment in this particular case. However, when we look in a little bit deeper, we will find an explanation that there is no need for Rashi to say anything. The same is in this week's Sedra. There is a pasuk that when we sell a piece of property in Eretz Yisrael, I'm looking for it myself. Kapitel Chav Hei, pasuk Chav Gimel. Pasuk says, you cannot sell anything eternally in Eretz Yisrael. And the pasuk gives a reason for it. What is the reason? Kili haaretz. The Rebbe says the land is mine. It's his. Then the pasuk goes on again. Obviously, it's another reason. Ki geirim v'toishavim atem imadi. Now, what does a geir mean? A geir means a stranger. A toishav means one who is not a stranger. In other words, geir and toishav are opposite concepts. Let us recall the Chumash Bereishis, when Avram Avinu asked to bury Sarah Ma'aras HaMachpelah, he used the expression Geir v'toishav anoichi imachem. What does Rashi comment on that? Rashi comments that Avram said as follows: In tirzu, if you want, I will act like a geir, like a stranger. In other words, I will pay a price. As long as you give it to me, I will pay the price. If you will not give it to me for a price, then I will act like a toishav. I am a resident here. I have an equal share in it just like everyone else, and I will grab it with force. So what do we see from that Rashi? That geir and toishav are two opposite concepts. Toshev means an old timer. He's here for long. Geir means he's a newcomer. Okay. Now, with this in mind, let us look into the pasuk. Pasuk says, "Va'aretz le'simachel litzmisos." The land cannot be sold eternally. Why kili ha'aretz? So, if we look into Rashi on the pasuk of Gimel, Rashi says kili ha'aretz. Rashi explains, "Al teira ein chaba." Don't feel bad. She'eina shalach, because it's really not yours. In other words, don't feel bad. I'm giving you a restriction. I'm telling you that you cannot sell land eternally. And the land will have to go back by Yovel and all the details which we learned here. Al teira ein chaba. In other words, it's a kind of expression of apology from the Rebbeinu Shalom to the Yidden. Excuse me, don't feel bad, because the Rebbe says, really, who is the balabas of Eretz Yisrael? He is. But the pasuk doesn't stop there. The pasuk goes ahead and says, Ki geirim v'teshavim atem imodi. Rashi doesn't comment anything on these words, Ki geirim v'teshavim atem imodi. Obviously, this is an additional reason why you cannot sell any piece of land eternally in Eretz Yisrael. And we just raised the question that geirim v'teshavim is two contradictory concepts. And Rashi doesn't say anything regarding this. Why? The pasuk says this is also a reason. Geirim v'teshavim atem imodi. Manashach. Either we are geirim with the Rebbeinu Shalom or with teshavim with the Rebbeinu Shalom. And in Bereshis, Rashi Taki explained it. How does this fit in here, the expression of ki geirim v'teshavim? And Rashi does not get involved whatsoever. The truth is that in Teiras Koyanim, Sifri, we find the expression which Rashi says, the interpretation on ki li ha'aretz, we also find in Teiras Koyanim. Al teira ein chaba, don't feel bad, she'eina shalach. In Teiras Koyanim we also find an interpretation on ki geirim v'teshavim atem imodi. But Rashi doesn't quote it. What does he teach there? Even though you think you are teshavim, and he teaches teshavim in the sense that you're others, doesn't mean others right away by Vorentu. We don't mean others by Avram, as Avram Yitzchak v'Yankiv. In other words, our parents, our ancestors. Even though you think your others lived in Eretz Yisrael, however, your others, kvar meisu, they passed away from Eretz Yisrael already. They are no longer there. In other words, generations keep on changing. However, the Rebbeinu Shalom is always there. That's what the Teiras Koyanim says. So that's the meaning. Ki geirim v'teshavim atem imodi, that you are geirim. And even the teshavim, in other words, those who are long past, they passed. They are no longer here. But the Rebbeinu Shalom is always here. Memela, he is the one who's really the balabas on Eretz Yisrael. This is what the Teiras Koyanim says. Rashi doesn't say it. So we are back to the question, what's going on here in the pasuk? Rabbi learns as follows. The Rabbi learns, pasuk tells us, "Va'aretz le'simacha litzmisos." We are told the commandment that we are not allowed to sell a piece of land, a piece of property in Eretz Yisrael, litzmisos eternally. And the Torah gives us the reason why. Ki li ha'aretz. The land belongs to the Rebbeinu Shalom. And as Rashi right away comments, Al teira eincha, but don't feel bad, she'eina shalach. Then the pasuk goes ahead, Ki geirim. Listen what the Rebbe learns. Ki geirim is a stop. You people, you Yidden, are like geirim, are like strangers. Why? Because the land is really mine. Who is the real balabas? The Rebbeinu Shalom. Are you going to complain and say, how can you, Rebbeinu Shalom, say that we are geirim in Eretz Yisrael? How can you tell us that? You told us that Eretz Yisrael is ours. You told us that already Avraham Avinu was kohen Eretz Yisrael. Nasativ, the pasuk says, there's an expression, Nasativ, I have given it already to Avraham. And Avraham was kohen Eretz Yisrael. Chazal tell us by walking through Eretz Yisrael, la'orko la'rochba, he walked the length and the width of Eretz Yisrael, and he was kohen Eretz Yisrael. So Eretz Yisrael belonged to whom? To Avraham already. And we are inheriting it from Avraham. Especially after the Yidden entered Eretz Yisrael, and the Yidden got Eretz Yisrael based on specific mitzvahs to fulfill in Eretz Yisrael. So Eretz Yisrael is sicher ours. So you are going to claim and say, Teishavim. How can you tell me, Rebbeinu Shalom? Yidden are saying that we are only Geirem in Eretz Yisrael, Toshavim. We are Toshavim. We are real. Eretz Yisrael is really ours. We are old timers in Eretz Yisrael. So the Rebbeinu Shalom says, true. You are Toshavim, but Atem Imodi together with me. You're not Toshavim there yourself. You're Toshavim there together with me. So if you're Toshavim together with me, I also have a say in the rules how you can sell Eretz Yisrael. So this is how the Rebbe is learning the Pashat of Pshat and the Pasuk. Remember, there's no need for Rashi to comment regarding the additional reason. And why is it that the Pasuk contradicts itself between Geirem and Toshavim, which is actually two contradictory concepts? First, we are Taki Geirem. But if we are going to complain and say no, how can we be given such a title of Geirem in Eretz Yisrael? We know Rebbeinu Shalom, you told us we are Toshavim. So true. Grant you that. But remember, Atem Imodi together with me. The Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen, concluded with, we find when the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim, that l'choil b'nei Yisrael haya oil b'meishvaisam, that when all the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim, even before we went out of Mitzrayim, the Rebbe brought lichtigkeit, oil, light, to the Yidden in all their places in Mitzrayim. Rebbe said, Kol ha-goliyis al shem Mitzrayim nikru, Chazal tell us, that all the Golas and all the exiles also carry the title of Mitzrayim. In other words, Mitzrayim was the source of all of the exiles which we are going through in later years and which we are still into now. The Mele the Rebbe concluded, just like it was by Mitzrayim, that before the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim, the Rebbe brought lichtigkeit, and lichtigkeit in all senses, lichtigkeit in Gashmias as well as spiritual light, lichtigkeit in Ruchnias, that the Rebbeinu Shalom helped that the same should be now. Before we are going out of this Mitzrayim, which we are in now, we're also in a Mitzrayim. We're also in Golas, and Golas is Mitzrayim. So let the Rebbe fulfill it, that the Rebbe should take us out of Golas, and before taking us out of Golas, it should be l'choil b'nei Yisrael, haya oil b'meishvaisam, yi oil b'meishvaisam, in this sense. We should have lichtigkeit b'gashmiyas, as well as lichtigkeit b'ruchniyas, and that Mashiach will come, he should be able to take us ba'anana shamaya, aruim anana shamaya, as the Rebbe keeps on quoting, on the clouds, take us all to Eretz Yisrael b'mheira v'yameinu. A gute Woche.